Well, look, hello. It's actually quite hard to believe, but we've done 66 episodes of the Procurement and Finance Coffee
I
Break,
know.
which means you've actually spoken to me for quite a long time without telling me off. So we thought for episode 67, we'd do something different. We thought we'd look back over the episodes, maybe do a bit of a summary, but actually we didn't, because what we discovered when we looked back over the 66 episodes was that, yes, there were 66 separate conversations, but there were things that just kept appearing across all of them. Well, weird. I mean, it's like...
So Rich has basically demanded that we're doing episode 67.
I know. So here we are now recording episode 67. We're not going to talk about all the different topics. What we're actually going to do is talk about 5 themes that came out of all of those recordings. And I guess, it came as a bit of a surprise that these 5 things just kept going. And we have to take notes because it's quite complex.
Yeah. But what's quite interesting is when we started off this series is that we made quite a few observations that are now coming true in the technology space. Anyway, I will not divert us, but actually even
more importantly, when we started talking about this, the intention, there was never a kind of a grand plan to kind of identify these things and talk to people. It was basically literally just have a coffee break and chat about things that we come across in business and look at them through the different lenses of procurement and finance. But there we go, it's done it. So let's get going. First thing, good technology never compensated for poor thinking. And incredibly, I mean, this came up right at the beginning with AI, it came up with data, it came up with accounting data models. And the irony is, when we did our it was the second episode on AI, which was April 2024, we talked about AI and what it might do. And it's undoubtedly been the biggest single technological change affecting business, not just us. But actually, what kept coming up whenever we mentioned it, whatever topic we were talking about it came back that AI wasn't a replacement for good thinking.
No.
And it couldn't solve poor process and it couldn't fix poor data.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was episode 2, or it was one of the early episodes where my general observation was, given that I've spent a great deal of my career doing target operating model design with ERP implementation.
Yep.
And, what you see time and time again, decades before AI was on the scene, is that ERP implementation struggled because of, lack of master data design or lack of good data. I think you came up a long, long time ago with some sort of Ferrari analogy and coal. So that coal...
No, it was a steam-powered Tesla.
That's it,
Steam-powered Tesla. Actually, yeah, because I mean, it is the right analogy for any technology implementation, which is if you buy a new piece of tech and then all you do is pay the provider to make it follow your old process with your old data. It's the same thing as taking the battery out of a Tesla and fitting it with a steam engine. But actually, that's what's happened with AI, I think.
I think, unfortunately, a lot of boards are just not really understanding, what AI can do and what it can't do, and what are some of the prerequisites, and just seeing AI as a sort of buzzword, as a sort of cost-cutting measure without really thinking,
people.
So let's just automate everything. Okay. So, but really you need to understand the problem statement first before you can work out what the solution is. And often the solution isn't something fancy like AI. Sometimes it's just, optimize your ERP system, make your integrations work better, have better master data governance. Anyway, I've said all these things before.
Yeah, but do you think knowing what we know now, do you think we would have talked differently about AI 2 years ago? Or do you think actually we were...
No, I've got to say rather smugly, I do feel like it's too much panned out as I thought it would. I think while some of the largest organizations that are a lot more mature than the average organization, like, your Coca-Colas or, your really giants, giant organizations. I'll just use Coke as an example.
Yes.
But those are the sort of organizations that are very mature already in their business processes, and then they're already pretty touchless, and then they're looking to use AI to automate those bits of the process that are still manual, and that's great for those.
And that's the key word.
Yeah,
AI can speed up stuff which is repetitive, which is just a waste of human time.
Yeah.
AI does that brilliant.
Yeah. And when you've got that great foundation, like
Yeah.
a massive organization, let's say like Coke,
Yeah.
and you're already very mature in your processes, you can look to do that, right? But if you've barely got a defined process, barely got master data management, you're just
Chuck AI at it.
yeah, that's not the solution.
It's not the solution. So there we go. The takeaway. Technology changes quickly. AI is changing even more quickly, but good thinking actually lasts a lot longer. So what was our second thing?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
what is our second thing? So procurement and finance are stronger together than apart.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Yeah. So Richard likes to pretend that most finance and procurement functions don't get along, which
Weird.
I don't agree. I think you find I get along with most people, Richard.
You do. Exactly. So it's only for dramatic effect. But I think actually it's what we've discovered is that they are absolutely integrated. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And often, like, I always think the best way to, not, it can be finance and procurement. It doesn't matter what it is in life. The best way you can get traction is finding win-win situations but everyone has an agenda in life.
Different lenses to look
and
through.
in work, different
Yeah.
lenses to look through.
Yeah.
And I think the way to get progress is work out what are other people's agendas and how can you both benefit from
Do you know it's really interesting?
what it is looking to improve.
I know, and one of my biggest bugbears, and it's the good old procurement trope, which is procurement must have a seat at the table. I mean, it's not if the CPO isn't on the board, then somehow it's disrespectful. I've never thought it's true. And actually, most of the time when I've been a CPO, I've reported once to the CEO, the rest of the time I report to the CFO. And I personally think it's a really good fit. I mean, the CFO.
I mean, most organisations are not big enough to have a CPO or CDO, and both of those often fall, whether it's right or not, into finance. A bit like in very small organisations, HR and IT also falls into finance.
But I mean, okay, HR and IT, tricky, but I think, but data, I think, procurement and finance, they essentially work on the same data, they're focused on the same things. And particularly as we talked about in all the sort of the ESG discussions, with sustainability reporting coming up, that's going through the CFO, but it's also of big interest to CPOs. So I just think it's a good fit. So what's our key takeaway, you think? Yeah,
as I say, I think finance and procurement, working together will always be stronger. But I would say that, it's not just procurement, right? Each back office function is a business partner to another function. And if you are working in silos, that is not, that is, well, you're going to fail, but also you're not going to add the value you should be adding to the organisation as a whole. And ultimately, as a function, you won't be paying for yourself. So
maybe some people just like arguing. I hope not. So there we go. Right. Third trend. Actually, this was really interesting because, like I said, when we started this, it was about procurement and finance. And when I was doing the analysis, and of course I used ChatGPT to help me go back over the episodes, it actually asked me a question. It said, was the intent to do a procurement and finance podcast, or was it to do a leadership podcast? And I thought, well, that's kind of an odd observation. I mean, you go through the prompt that tell me why you asked me that. And actually, when it presents evidence, it is remarkable how many times the things that we've spoken about, whether it was target operating model, or technology change, or data changes, or diversity in the way people are treated, they always lead back to Rome. They lead back to leadership.
No, I suppose everything starts from leadership and cascades down, doesn't it?
I think so, but it's kind of surprising when you talk about some some esoteric topics, and trust me, Claire has come up with some esoteric topics. Maintained interest. By the way, I've done the same. But even the ones where we're talking about treasury behaviour, that particularly when you were talking about treasury across international organisations, it still came back to what does an organisation decide about the way that it wants to behave and the way it wants to operate.
Yeah, and it goes back to, I think it was our very first episode. What is your vision for the organisation? What is your high level target operating model? And if, as a leadership team, you don't have a view of that, how are you meant to cascade that vision and execute on that vision? Too many organisations I see as someone working in transformation, will pursue one objective. Let's say their objective is we want to double in size and go on an M&A spree.
Yep.
And they do that and then they target top line growth, maybe EBITDA as well. But let's say they're targeting top line growth and then they realize actually we haven't actually thought about how we're going to integrate these businesses. We haven't thought about how our acquisition strategy links to our integration strategy. We haven't thought about what the target operating model for this business should be as it scales. So my observation is basically, as a leadership team, you should not think about your high level operating model, how the business will operate as a one-time exercise when you realize actually I've done all this M&A strategy. The business is screaming now because we haven't got the right processes. We haven't talked about scalability. We haven't talked about all these things. Thinking of it as almost, I would say almost as part of your AOP, right? If you're doing your AOP, you should be also thinking, right, what operating model changes do I need to make to facilitate that AOP?
Yep. Wait, do you know what? I'm ex-military. I can't help myself. There used to be a wonderful saying, top of the tank, which was, it didn't matter what you were doing, and it didn't matter how tired or how difficult the task was. If whoever was in command could not stand on top of the tank and give the order and commit to it and then drive it through, the chances were that it would fail. And I think one of the things that, again, it came out in many of the discussions is that lots of change management, lots of change programs, they start and they're initiated at the functional level and then they find themselves in treacle because they're not being driven through by the board. And, and many times we spoke about it, you're going to do any kind of change, whether it's technology or operating or cultural, it has to be led from the top and it has to be driven by the top. So that thing about executive sponsorship isn't just something you tick on a racy. It actually really matters for the success. So, there's lots of things that can cause change, but it's actually leadership that delivers it.
And it's not necessarily just sort of like, let's say you're a medium-sized organization and let's say you're doing some sort of complex, let's say it is ERP implementation, just because that's my bag.
Yeah.
That's normally a complex change category.
Absolutely.
And let's say you don't have anyone with experience of that on C-suite, right? The answer is not, Richard, you are now responsible for this ERP implementation. It should be Richard, you are now responsible as executive sponsor, but I expect you to get appropriate client-side advice to make it a success, right? Yeah. And that may be one external advisor, maybe you have two, but it's about the leadership and handing.
You make such a good point. There is such a difference between a board saying this project is being delivered by Richard and a board saying we are delivering this project and Richard is the person that's acting on our behalf.
Yeah.
Richard is our leader nominated by the board.
Yeah, because the point I'm trying to make is so many times I've seen, Richard has been appointed, but Richard has never done this before in his life. So it is important that you kind of have the appropriate advisors, and it could be more than one advisor. It doesn't, you can take the view of a number of people to inform you.
Right, there we go. So that was theme 3. Every trend becomes a leadership system. Trend 4.
So trend 4 apparently is organizations increasingly compete through decision quality. So do you want to explain that, Richard?
I'm quite happy to. It kind of comes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is, even if the best organizations, are in a great state and they can employ tech or AI to improve the way they operate faster, simply operating faster isn't a source of competitive advantage in and of itself. It's whether an organization can operate faster so that it can make decisions more quickly about where to compete, where not to compete, where to invest, where not to invest.
Yeah. I mean, take it as a a consulting house that I work for. Okay. You can say that sometimes speed is good, right? How fast can you get a proposal turned around? How fast can you get a deliverable turned around? But at the end of the day, it comes down to quality as well. What is the quality of that deliverable or proposal? What is the differentiation of that quality?
We talked about this earlier, which is AI, perfect implementation, comes up with, you should do this, you should do that, I recommend it.
Which is doing for everyone, right?
Right.
But then how do you still differentiate if you really leverage AI?
Right. It's because actually, A, it's not always right, and B, that a human should be the one looking at whatever has been recommended and saying, I'm going to execute good judgment, and I'm going to decide we're going to do this. It's not let the AI go and run your business. Otherwise, well, if it worked, everyone would be doing it. But they're not. There's the clue.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there's the thing. Winning organizations don't just work faster, they work better. And that brings us to the last one. And this is going to make us sound really old and mature, which is we've talked about lots of new
We're old. Definitely you. You're old.
Definitely old. Okay. So, I mean, how do we do this? 66. I mean, it's quite an achievement. We've done the 66.
It is.
But actually, I think, if we think about all the different things we've talked about, I'm going to read from the list: AI, ESG, geopolitical disruption, inflation, digital transformation, sustainability, operating models, treasury, tax. I mean, so much, right? And yet, all of them have kind of spun themselves round and they've come back to real basics, which is trust, about communication, about commercial understanding, and about good judgment. And I think we can add one more to that list, which is what you talked about with silos, which is the ability and the willingness to operate together and make sure that you are, acting as each other's business partners. Right? But it's funny that all of this came out from, that despite the fact that, the world's dominated by headlines on AI, it's actually these basic things which are right.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm honest, sometimes I get a bit frustrated by the incessant noise around AI because I feel like sometimes it detracts from these fundamentals that people are getting distracted from.
Yep.
But yeah, that's just my pet peeve. But
the good news is that it would appear that all of our discussions agree that actually it's human skill that's valuable. It's a soft skill, trust, judgment, decision making that actually have value. And I suppose it comes back down to that, that thing that, salespeople always talk about, which is people buy from people.
Yes.
And therefore, business is still a people thing. Leadership still matters. Yes, there's lots of things that can speed it up, but actually it's people skills that really drive it.
Absolutely. I think certainly that point you're making around trust, right? Because so many times I've seen on transformation projects, like there can be resistance to change.
Yep.
I think if you have the right leadership and certainly the right advisory services working with you, that trust can get built, and then people that resistance to change or that kind of that hesitancy around what future is because if I trust you, Richard, then I trust that you're kind of basically going to look after me, right?
Yeah.
And that in business is not going away anytime soon, right? You can't automate trust.
So there we go. 5 themes. If you think about it, technology, AI kind of exposed weakness rather than creating it. Procurement and finance, 2 professions, but we work together. Leadership. Every discussion we've talked about has come back to the role of leadership. Decision quality. It's not just being able to operate faster. It's being able to make decisions, business decisions that deliver value, and fundamentals, which is in the face of all of that change, it actually comes down to people. So how would you sum up our discussion?
Wow. Well, obviously, as I say, there's a lot in the news around AI, but I essentially think fundamentals of what we do remain unchanged. Is perhaps how we do it. It's an evolution, right? And wherever new technology has introduced, it has generally changed the way we work. It's changed people's jobs and their skill set. I think there's a lot of fear factor around the number of jobs that will be lost. As I say, a lot of companies are nowhere near. The vast majority of companies are nowhere near ready to automate things on an end-to-end basis.
And more importantly, many of you will have seen the news. Lots of companies thinned out, hollowed out their workforce for the promise of AI and are now struggling to bring people back in.
Wow,
they've lost expertise and experience and judgment.
And also because, the whole, and this is where I could go on for ages, so you better wrap me up soon, but the whole economy of AI is still improving, right? Because tokens are expensive.
I think definitely unproven.
Yeah. So that perhaps could be our next copy break, the economics of AI.
Well, I'm smiling. It's a good topic. If we think about those themes and what we've talked about in the next 66, and actually if we're being really honest about it, our 66 episodes, just in the last 2 years, so much has happened. Legislation's changed, conflict has happened.
Yeah.
There's been huge disruptions to supply chains. AI, whether we like it or not, has had a really big impact on the way companies are behaving. I think it's going to be quite interesting to see whether I think we might do a summary after the next 33 rather than 66, but to see how much over the next year, whether these 5 themes continue or whether, something emerges. But I think overall, we've been talking about procurement and finance, but actually what we're talking about is good business.
Yeah. And we've had some great guests as well.
Do you know what? You're so right to remind me of that. We have had some wonderful guests. And again, with deep expertise and with insights that actually fitted into those themes as well, because they're part of these 66 episodes. So yeah, we're going to get some great guests on. If you want to be a guest, you want to talk about your topic, please just drop us a line. If you've enjoyed what you've listened to, we're going to be sharing some clips from the past episodes so that we can, just bring some of those conversations back to life. But equally, we hope you subscribe and we hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Okay.
But for now, bye-bye.
Bye.